Hey, it's syndicated radio talk show host, author, singer Al Cole, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. I come from CBS Radio. My shows are nationally syndicated, and I've helped pave the way to treating women, guys too, with the dignity that they deserve. And I treat people with dignity because I'm treated with dignity too, with some of the top networks around that air my show, People of Distinction. And the biggest is Apple's iTunes Radio Network under their professional news talk division, airing CBS shows and Fox News, NPR, BBC shows, C-SPAN, everything. So we get all around the country, around the world. And, today we have a guy who's coming on and proves that we get all around the world. This guy's from Australia. And he's written a marvelous book about war. Now, war isn't such a marvelous thing. We know that. All right. This guy's a great guy, and he wouldn't write anything that's unmarvelous. So, his name is Greg Cater, calling all the way from Australia. He's written a book called The Warmonger's War. Whoa, what does that mean, Al? Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you. I know a little bit about what it means, and then Greg is going to come on and tell us, exactly what it means. As far as I know, boy, it has to do with World War II. Everybody knows about World War II, even if you were not old enough to participate in World War II in any way. World War II happened before we were all born and all that stuff. But World War II was a big, big war, needless to say. And in that bigness, there could be, little meetings, micro meetings of people who created relationships with each other. Positive relationships, friendship relationships, love relationships. His book is all about a couple of guys from the Australian Army who really become friends. Yeah, in the midst of war, they like each other. In the midst of war, maybe they talk about, some of the deeper things of life. And in the midst of war, they actually engage in a peaceful, personal and professional relationship. Now, if that can happen during war, that can certainly happen during peace. And so we encourage this. And in the midst of all of that, they also get involved in intelligence. Okay, now, there are two ways to see intelligence. One is the straight-out way of, wow, people are intelligent. Yeah, I think we're all born with intelligence. And if we use intelligence intelligently, we can help to make this more of a peaceful world. Okay, we know that. During war, intelligence might mean, we got to do what we can to win this war and maybe spy on the other side and things like that, and put a lot of documents together and a lot of stats that indicate how we can win. All right, that sort of intelligence. So these two guys were involved in intelligence on that latter basis, really military intelligence, let's say. And they came out with something in the first sense of intelligence. Yeah, something that really worked. Now, I'm not going to give it away. Greg is going to tell us about that, what really worked with their relationship, and even in intelligence. Whoa, now people, now that you know basically what's going on here, I know you'll want to stick around and listen to Greg, and what he's going to say is the real deal here with his book, The Warmonger's War. And you can grab it at Amazon.com. I want you to go there. And also grab this. He was brought to me by UR-Link, one of the greatest cutting-edge book publishers in the country and around the world. So, if you want to get a step closer to your best-selling book aspirations, well, you got to run to this website, urlinkpublishing.com. Let's welcome Greg to People of Distinction with Al Cole so we can get the bottom line here, the lowdown on his great book, The Warmonger's War. Greg Cater, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. How are you, Al?
I'm doing very well, too. Welcome to People of Distinction with Al Cole. Now, let's get into this, the Warmonger's War, and you can get into it by telling us a little bit about your background, if maybe you served in the military or whatever, maybe intelligence, and tell us a little bit about Greg, a little bit about your background, and then move it into your book, The Warmonger's War. Who is Greg Cater, Greg?
Well, I must admit that I was not involved in the Second World War. In fact, I was only born one day before the war started, actually in September of 1939. And the joke in our family is that my father took one look at me and went to North Africa. So
I like it. I mean, it wasn't a good thing for you, but it certainly is funny for my listeners.
Yeah, so I didn't meet him till I was about 5 years old. He fought in the initially in the Syrian campaign against the Vichy French and Germans. That's where the Warramunga's War starts off, actually. The two main characters are a guy called Jamie Munro, who's a country lad. The other one is Jack O'Brien, better known as Jacko, and he's actually a half Warramunga Aboriginal from the central part of the Northern Territory in Australia. They become very firm friends. Eventually, they're absconded by the MI6 into conducting intelligence operations out of Cairo during the Desert War. And this is very important work in eventually defeating the Africa Corps, which was Rommel's army in North Africa. From there, they are actually able to clean up a lot of the consequences of war, carrying out nefarious operations. Jamie was wounded on the front line in Syria. In fact, they even carried him back to a hospital, and they became very close friends after that. And then they operated, as I said before, in intelligence in Cairo. And there's a bit of romance comes into it too, because Jacko meets a really beautiful Syrian French girl in Cairo, and so it gets excitement, sabotage, and romance all mixed together, and of course, great friendship.
And that friendship led to intelligence as well. They were military intelligence people. Did they start out as military intelligence, or did they develop that way?
No, they started out. They developed that way, yeah.
The friendship, I guess, was even strengthened by the fact that they were involved in intelligence as well. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they worked together. Yeah, that's right. And they just built up a friendship which lasted for many, many years.
And you mentioned intrigue. Okay, we're always intrigued by intrigue here on People of Distinction. When they got involved in the intelligence, what were some of the intriguing things? We always think of James Bond. All right, 007 and,
yeah.
you know, spies like that. Did they get involved in that sort of intrigue, or was it just a day-by-day
it was a little bit like that. Yeah, it was a little bit like that. You know, the Cairo during the war was a melting pot of spies. There were spies from the Vichy French, from the Germans, the Italians, and they were each fighting the war in their own way. And the job of Jamie and Jacko really was to track down the German or the enemy spies anyway, who were all over Cairo in different guises, and to track them down and either neutralize them or to just feed them with false information. And so it gets quite exciting, actually, all that period. And they use a lot of the people in Cairo, even belly dancers and people, of which there were many at that time. There's assistants in the intelligence operations.
And who were they basically fighting at that point? Germans or Italians or both? Or Japanese? Who were the actual enemies?
Oh, the enemies were the Japanese. Hadn't come into the war at that time in 1941.
Okay.
It was mainly Germans and Italians, and also the Vichy French, who were the French who were on the side of the Germans.
That's right, and that must have made it little bit complicated too, because of course the French were
Oh, yeah.
allies in general. Yeah, tell us how those complications impacted their
Well,
friendship and
that's right.
impacted
Yeah,
intelligence.
the the French were divided down the middle after Hitler had taken over France.
Yeah.
Um, there were the Free French, who many of whom had to hide their operations, and also a lot of them had escaped to England. And there were the Vichy French, who sided with the Germans after the Germans occupied France. And in fact, the Vichy French were the ones fighting against the Australians, first of all, in Syria. So it was very complicated indeed. And when you met Frenchmen in Cairo, you didn't know which side of the operation they were on.
Wow.
And that had to be worked out.
That's right. And it sounds to me, and probably to a lot of my listeners right now, of the Humphrey Bogart movie Casablanca.
Yeah,
and kind of in the same
great
area,
movie.
northern Africa, and with the
Sure.
Vichy's and the Free French and all of that stuff, and the back and forth, and Humphrey Bogart playing both sides against the middle, and all of that. So that is real. A lot of that really happened. The things in Casablanca maybe expressed a lot of the realities that you're talking about as well in Egypt at that particular point. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that type of thing happened very often.
Yeah.
I suppose the thing in the Warramunga's war, closest to Casablanca was Casablanca. A lot of it occurred in a restaurant or a nightclub, and well, in Cairo, a lot of the intrigue occurred actually in a place called the Opera, which wasn't an opera at all. It was actually very high-class belly dancing. And and that was true. That place actually existed, and I did a lot of research. The history is very accurate, and all the events take place in this historical background.
Wow. Isn't that something? I'm going to get you to buy this book, people. This goes out to you right now. A special guest, Greg Cater, who's calling all the way from Australia, and his, you could say, maybe even heartwarming book, The Warmonger's War. During World War II, it's an intrigue of friendship and also intelligence and a whole bunch of other things. I want you to order this book over at Amazon.com. And we have some minutes left in the show, Greg. I want to take it out with a couple of things here. Number one, with the friendship that that your two people showed to each other in your book, The Warmonger's War, did it ever get down to, getting back to Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart formed a nice professional and then personal relationship with the military officer whose name I can't think of right now. Towards the end of the show, particularly when that military officer forgave him of all of the crimes that Humphrey Bogart could have been up for, and they walked out into the sunset.
Actually, that's right. He was a gendarme. Actually, he was a police officer.
Yes, that's right. And so, in your book, with these two intelligence officers, did they ever form any positive relationships, friendship relationships with the enemy? Because they liked individuals who they were fighting, supposedly fighting against, but they liked these individuals and forming anything of friendship that way, or even maybe just saying, war is hell. Sometimes we're killing people who otherwise could be friends of ours. Did that ever come into the Warmonger's War purview at all?
No, they didn't. They didn't make any friends with any of the German spies.
Right. Okay.
Who were some of them were pretty ruthless. So they were not friendly guys themselves. But they made a lot of friends with different people in Cairo, Egyptians, and and it was quite a melting pot of all sorts of people. Of course, Syrians.
Yeah.
and they actually made a lot of friendships which were extremely useful to them.
Mm-hmm. And, the final question here, possibility thinking, taking it out with that. I end all of my shows with possibility thinking in terms of whatever my guest was talking about on the show. If some parts of that became reality, what could we learn from it in our future human development? I'm going to put it this way. With the warmonger's war, of course, you're talking not only about war, but you're talking about peace as well. Some of the relationships of peace between certainly these two friends and maybe other people who are brought into that friendship as well. Even amidst war, we can still have some individual peace. What can we learn from the warmonger's war that would relate to our time with some of these wars? The war in Iraq that technically is still going on. Our relationship with Afghanistan, that war and all of that, and maybe even ISIS. Things that are on the mindset of my listeners and everyday people. War, war, war. Is there anything that you can reach out to with some sort of mission that the warmonger's war takes to help us get through war, even in our times, Greg?
The Warramunga's War and the other 3 books that I've written, which were the Warramunga's Aftermath of War, The Skills of the Warramunga, and Conflict on the Yangtze, they actually deal during peacetime, but with the consequences of war. And that's really quite interesting because a lot of villains took advantage of the destruction that was caused by war to do some pretty dreadful things to people. And this is where Jamie and Jacko become very involved in places like the Philippines, Malaysia, and China. And during the aftermath of war in 1946.
War is another example of everyday life, but an extreme example of that. Within war itself, we have everything that happens in everyday life. Sometimes some carnage, sometimes, of course, a lot of heartbreak, and even sometimes some friendship. War can be an example sometimes of what we can do in our peacetime if we learn some of the positive messages, get that, of war, especially in the Warmonger's War by Greg Cater, our special guest on People of Distinction. We can learn how to regulate our own lives during non-war times. We can learn how to reduce some of the negativity in our own life. We can learn how to be hopeful. There are a lot of soldiers out there, not just now, but time immemorial. Soldiers who, in the background, were saying, but I'm learning a lesson here about life. Let's learn a lesson about life through war, sometimes as expressed by great people like Greg Cater, not trying to scare you, but to try to educate you. The Warmonger's War is a good example of that, and with intelligence, and particularly with friendship. So one more time, I want you to grab that book at Amazon.com, and always remember that Link, one of the greatest cutting-edge book publishers in the country, is behind you too. If you have a book out, and even if you don't have a book right now and you want to have best-selling book aspirations, well, you got to run to this website. Get involved with Link. Go to urlinkpublishing.com. Thank you so much, Greg, for being my special guest on People of Distinction with Al Cole today. This has really been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Al, and I hope everything goes very well with you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Hopefully we'll meet somewhere down the road. That'll be great.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you ever come down under and learn to walk upside down,
I'll try.